Hi, Srishti.
Hi.
Should I pause the recording and then start it back on again?
Yeah, just start it when the meeting starts.
Hot stove cooled under the moon. The right branch found and sharpened to dip into the potion, a piece of parchment, dry enough but not too dry, has to be smoothed before the pen can be lifted from the decoction, wet enough but not drippy, so the words form in neat, thick chunks as the hours pass slowly. So at day's end, if 4 lines are written, it's a feat, especially if dishes have to be washed, laundry hung out to dry, kids fed, and 100 pieces of family life picked up. It must have been the woman with magic who put a guard on watch to brush a few strokes on leaves, the pen spout her life. So imagine the women who couldn't manage it all. Let the dye coagulate, the pen stick to the bowl, the parchment vanish into yellow dust. My next poem is called Ghazal for Mothers Who Have Lost Their Children to Police Brutality. And the epigraph is from Representative Sheila Jackson Lee. As a mother, I hear your cry. Mother Earth opens her arms to embrace you as you fall. Slow motion, the air parting, unable to stop the fatal fall. Mothers endure their children's agony as bullets rip skin and sinew, but their cries of stop cannot break their children's fall. When the law tested Sita, setting her ablaze to test if she was true, Mother Earth said, enough, and took her home. Now tell me who fell. I join your cry, mothers, as you stand bereft, justice long overdue. We labored hard to birth our babies from dawn to nightfall. We cared for every inch of our children, skin, bone, tissue. Their moral fiber we embroidered with care so they'd not fall. And you dare again and again to snatch our tender few, adding to your score. You think nothing can befall the giant law, armed and fattened with immunity's glue. Your mothers too are sorry to see you stoop so low and fall. Don't underestimate us. We are shaking off our blues and dismantling our land of laws that make our children fall. And in this final poem, I'd like to read is, it was something that I wrote right after the Women's March in January 2017. The Flood. Dawn sees a string of women in the city waiting to board the bus. Voices ripple in the dark, a roll call of names, and soon the bus rides the descending fog, following a necklace of red lights weaving into the capital. Women hold up banners, call out, call out, call out the king and his henchmen. Spilling into avenues, they walk colorful in coats, hats, and scarves, chanting, bursting into song. Yes, we shall overcome. Sister, shine this little light of mine. Yours and mine, let it shine. Spirits take wing as words burst from lips of women and men who work brutal hours to lift the weak and now lift sagging spirits. Courage, sisters, and the women cry back, courage and power, heat gathering in layers, the air warm with joined wills, a giant tide gradually curling into the perimeters. Thank you.
Pramila, if you want, you have another 4 minutes. Would you like to read your last poem?
Oh, sure. I didn't realize I had time. Okay. Okay. This poem is something that I wrote for the. I'm trying to find it. Okay. So since I started off with acknowledging Native Americans, this is a poem called Homage to Standing Rock. Echo of the ricochet, echo of history, of the US of A stepping his giant foot on the triangle of Sioux shore. The ground shudders, but on this freezing day, white, black, green, and brown hold together on the banks of the Missouri, ancient spirits guarding them, listening, listening, as guardians must while tending to their young. Deer, buffalo, hummingbirds, and eagles swoop onto Standing Rock, hold vigil, and the water murmurs along its spirit unswerving, lending its song to the Arctic air, swelling the fragile teepees and tents. Creatures of this brittle earth know this. Our breath, the food we eat, the trees' shade, clean air, say, we are not made by oil. Fire can be kindled by striking two stones. So are our hearts with the touch of water and air and each other. This fire that resists. Thank you.
Those poems were beautiful, Pramila. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank
I
you.
actually had a question in regards to your poem, Guzzle for Mothers Who Have Lost Their Children to Police Brutality, which, by the way, was such a heart-wrenching piece given these current circumstances. I was actually wondering why you chose the guzzle structure specifically for that poem.
I guess because of the haunting nature of the repeated images, and also the ghazal structure has a lot of repetition, and that repetition creates that kind of haunting feeling. And here in this particular ghazal that I read, the word that ended the word that was repeated is the word fall. And I felt that that word fall, it's such a simple word, but that is the most heartrending image that we have, and the heartrending image that a mother can never get out of her mind.
Definitely. Yeah. And as you can see in the chat, everyone's stunned by your work. So our next poet for this evening is Miss Sophia Naz. So as a 2016 Pushcart Prize nominee, Sophia is a writer, translator, editor, artist, and photographer. Her work has been published in over 24 literary journals, and her published poetry collections are Peripheries, Pointillism, and Date Palms. Beyond her contributions to Matwaala, Sophia is the poetry editor of the Sunflower Collective, editor of a literary journal titled City, and the founder of Rekhti, a site dedicated to avant-garde Urdu poetry. So without further ado, thank you for joining us, Sophia. Oh, sorry, did I?
Oh, so, hi, can everyone hear me? Hi, everyone. I'm delighted to be here, and I'd like to begin by thanking India Currents and the directors of Matwaala, Pramila Venkateswaran and Usha, who've created this wonderful platform for us South Asian diaspora poets to be sharing our work at such a momentous time where, it's really, we're witnessing what I think is a sea change in consciousness as regards to race relations in America. So I'm going to begin with the poem which I wrote actually at the 2016, the time of the 2016 election. And in many ways, it is unfortunately still relevant in 2020. It's called The United States of Amnesia. Welcome to the United States of Amnesia, where the average attention span is an albatross around the neck of history, drowning in largesse of half-caff mocha frappuccino. At every other corner, 9/10 of teeth submerge in this melting pot, Super Bowl of guillotined Halloween, cropped and photoshopped to the death, and the bell trolls a clockwork orange. Clones and minions man the phones, ringing off the hook like an armless pirate with his peddling finger on the Twitter, out to abduct you, only lonely immigrant child America. This illegal election year, unlike any other in living erasure. Welcome to the dystopian states of amnesia, to the gloom of the homeless underpasses, to the panhandling flutes drowned out in the tropics of the nocturnal subterranean. Washed up on your shores like a bottle with a pent-up ocean in my bladder, memory is the only currency I hold, the infected blankets up to the light. I know the smell of genocide. I have watched women shamed as witches, watched them fall like dominoes on a Salem noon. I have met Sally Hemings and the strange fruit of your history, America. I have fallen in your uncivil war of 1,001 episodes. This beast you thought you tamed, he prowls the profiled night wearing a police uniform. Beneath your bipolar indifference, a glacial, racial ice age is dying, unseen below decks, in red bullet points, in blue moans, while a white sea sails on. So this was my I think every immigrant has a writes a poem, their take on America. This was mine. I am going to write. I believe that the intersectionality is what I really believe in, that there are really no the lines between environmental degradation, gender equality, all of these are, I believe, very firmly connected. And I don't see a separation when we talk of activism. So a lot of my poems are actually environmental poems. And this one is called The Last Beekeeper. Bees are living in my eyes. They feed on my tears all day and through the coal black night. I can hear them buzzing as they mill my dreams to honey, hum incessantly in the rag reserved for species on the brink of becoming extinct. I blink the bleak milk back, lachrymose to the core at the thought of being this ocular cave hole, last recourse of Apis mellifera as a dying planet, toxic from sweltering belly to melting poles, runs the last lap in its course. So that was The Last Beekeeper. And this one is related to gender relations and to the suffocation. It speaks of the suffocation many women feel. It's called Splitting Screens. Broken gram, her weight and balance beam repeat, doesn't miss a single beat. Woman, as splitting headache, bad apple, spittoon for seed, bossed from on high, sifting through shifting feelings, fear, like a clot of flour in the cake. No one would know the measure of that furtive cupping. Unread blood would boil over, yet remain hallways in the marrow, dread, hollow as a bone to pick, and pick it up she did, knowing those hated eyes that held her pittance hostage like a soft summer peach, biting her lips to keep an angry dam from spilling the beans, because, par for the course, Men were golfers, women holes. So that's a pretty biting critique of what is our current state of gender relations even today. And then I've written a poem, because we are here, I feel we are here because of George Floyd. It's been a cataclysmic event that I think has capped a whole series of hundreds of years of events, but it's finally a spark that has ignited a movement, I believe. So this is called Take a Breath, and for George Floyd, whose last words were, "I can't breathe." Because you are more than this color that folds all others in its rainbow, more than bruised flesh, oppressed and pushed until there are no words left. Take a breath, dear brother, because you are more than 400 years of hate and hurt, more than the surround sound of silence complicit in daily hum. Take a breath, dear brother, because you are an arc of history long and long overdue, but bending under the weight of strangled fruit, at last to slight semblance of justice. Take a breath, dear brother, because we gather our strength, open our lungs, unbind our tongues in your name and in the name of all the others, brothers and sisters and mothers, killed in those fields we call our home, our hearth. Take a breath, dear brother, because you said you wanted to touch the world, and here we are, holding you, holding on. So that was my poem for, I don't know how much time do I have.
You're actually right on time. You are done.
Okay,
You're amazing. Thank you so much. That was incredible. I'm going to pass you off to Kanchan. Give me a sec.
Great, perfect. Yeah, so I just found all of your work so deeply relevant in a way that kind of broke my heart, you know. Like many other people like many other people in the chat, I was a little stunned by the fact that you had written, for example, the United States and Amnesia in 2016, but here we are in 2020 still living the realities of that poem.
Yes.
I had a question about the United States of Amnesia because, in my opinion, I think it employs some amazing wordplay, from like the alliteration to some of the rhyming sequences that you have in there. And one that really struck out to me is where you talk about, where you compare the United States of America to a glacial racial ice age. And I was just wondering if you could maybe elaborate on that idea.
Yes, it's been 400 years. The slavery has been 400 years, and you know, it is not enough. The pace of change has been so. This is what it is. It's glacial. They had an Emancipation Proclamation, but then the 40 acres and the mule never materialized, and there was constant backlash. And I believe that you know, racism is so institutionalized in this country. If you really scratch beneath the surface, you know, from the segregated neighborhoods to still today, an average African American family holds 1 penny of wealth to $1 of the average, So, I'm at I've been, activism is in my blood. I have, my family on my father's side were socialist activists. So I do believe, we have to push much harder for change in this country because it's so slow. It's like everybody's, there's so much pushback. I think the election of 2016 was a racial backlash. I mean, it's, obvious from the birther controversy that was pushed. And, yes, this is as the heart of my writing is that we definitely need to raise our voices against this kind of like slow walking of all the injustices. I mean, I'm one of those who definitely believe that we need reparations, because unless and until we have economic equality, racial equality is impossible.
Great. Yeah. I just, one thing that also struck me, as you were talking about us kind of living on this legacy kind of racial inequality in the United States. I just love the fact that that the United States of Amnesia is kind of directed at sort of a personified America, rather than simply kind of talking about America as though it were in the third person. I think it really hits the nail on the head, so to speak, in terms of just having a very raw, unfiltered conversation about all the inequalities and prejudices that are present at this current hour. So thank you so much for some very moving poetry. Our next poet is Pushcart Prize nominee Zilka Joseph. Her work has appeared in nearly 20 literary publications, including the Kenyan Review Online, Review Americana, and Cheers to Muses, an anthology of contemporary works by Asian American women. Her first chapbook, Lands I Live In, was nominated for a PEN America Beyond Margins Award, and since then, she has been recognized by the Forward Indie Book Awards, Finishing Line Press's New Women's Voices, and the Michael S. Gutterman Prize in Poetry. It's a pleasure to have you, Zilka.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Hi, everyone. Good to see you all. Thank you so much, India Currents. Thank you, Srishti. Thank you, Kanchan. And of course, thank you, Pramila and Usha, for including us all in this wonderful collective. I think all of us being immigrants have felt this sense of being pushed aside or marginalized, or somehow we're less than in some way. A lot of my work is more about my journey. Some of it is a spiritual journey. Some of it is the experience of the oppression of women from, back home in India, how we feel about things. Certain figures that have stood out in my mind as a point in which some change happened or some shift happened. And a lot of my writing sort of just embraces the journey of the soul in many ways. So though I had about 5 poems to read, I think I'll just do 4 because the last one is a bit longer and it's more in spoken word style. I've chosen poems with very different styles, just so that there's a little bit of texture and change. So the first poem I'm going to read is called Havan. And as many of you know, the word is the sacrificial fire, the sacrifice itself. And I've used that term to sort of bring in this whole scene of bright burning. I don't know if if I hold my book up to the camera, whether you'd be able to see the shape of the poem. I just wanted to see how the poem moves on the page, because I wanted to represent fire. Havan. He got angrier. They lifted the blue plastic can from the kitchen floor, my hand, haldi streaked. I cried out, I backed away, ran toward the bedroom. The old lady held on to my sari pallo, pulled me hard. She was 70, but she was strong. I could see her beetle-stained teeth close to my face, jagged yellow bone, cage door opening, fingers like steel hinges, creaking, Krishna, Krishna, pay my dowry. Oh, Krishna, I have no children. Murmuring in the peepal trees, rain of thin glass, bangles breaking, mouth full flood of kerosene, generous as love. Blue god flesh on fire, like sindoor in my hair, easily caught like ghee and grain, eaten whole. Take it all, take, oh witness, union divine. No holy Ganga water, no sweetness like jasmine or sandalwood. This burning, this flame eternal. The next poem I'm going to read sort of links to this image of fire, but in a slightly different way, I think. It's a short ghazal, which I dedicated to Jyoti Singh. I think most of us know that that name is literally burned into our consciousness and our history, our women's history in India, who was raped and brutally raped and died of fatal injuries in a bus in Delhi. At the time I wrote this poem, and it was published in my book, Sharp Blue Search of Flame, the perpetrators were still at large and boasting. And the lawyers were making a big deal of how that they threatened that they would continue to do this because, you know, they had the right to. And now it's different. They have received their judgment and they have been hanged. So this is the first time really I'm reading it after that has happened. And it's called, again, What Burns. So you'll see the repetition in the ghazal. Only 20% of girls are good. Hood them and tame them, or it's you they'll burn. What do you want? To be God, man, or beast? Your karma, your goddesses, your crosses burn. You say, smother them small, in wombs or home. No food, books, dowry, and no bra to burn. Will mercy reign on the holy who pray, who say none but devils and rebels burn? Who will remember as we turn to ash? Poet, words are witness, make darkness burn. So that was my ghazal for Jyoti Singh. The next two poems I'm going to read are poems that are in my manuscripts that are currently in circulation, and I hope one day they'll find a home. They've been searching for quite a long time. The next poem I have is called 25 Responses, and the way I have arranged it is in a series of 25 responses to an incident. Sometimes when we tell somebody about an incident of racism, or something that has happened to us, whether it's in this country, whether it's home, whether it's our parents, whether it's our friends, no matter who. So it sort of encapsulates different responses. And it's called 25 Responses, or pick a combo, or as you like it. 1, this happened here, but it's such a welcoming place. 2, what? I'm sure you misunderstood. 3, they'll get used to seeing you. This happens everywhere. 4, ignore them. It's ignorance, nothing else. 5, bah, they're just jealous to see immigrants doing well. 6, Then you should see the way some people treat me at the office. 7. Really? Are you sure? 8. Oh my, I'm sorry. This happened here? 9. Crickets. 10. They get up and walk away. 11. They shift in their chairs and change the subject. 12. You're not the only one who suffers. 13. Please come to our church next Sunday. We welcome everyone. 14. At least they didn't have guns. 15. Who told you to leave our home and go so far away? 16. Do you know that black folks are shot every day? 17. Didn't you know before you came how racist this country is? 18. There's so much discrimination in India, so why make such a fuss? 19. How do people treat Muslims in India? And what about caste? 20. Things are worse now all over the world. We thought we'd come a long way. 21. What's new? Segregation, segregation, segregation. 22. Have you ever heard of reverse racism? 23. Will you go back to India? 24. When will you go back to India? 25. When will you come home? And my last poem of the evening, thank you. My last poem of the evening is written more in a spoken word pattern. And it was part of a project where we were sent photographs by people who had been taken to Detroit to photograph different scenes. And this was a picture of a church, a large round church window seen from the outside. And a number of lines reflect from a poem by Lorna Goodison called God a Me. She's the great Jamaican poet who was made poet laureate last year. So it's called God of the Great Blue Window. And it was originally written for Trayvon Martin, but sadly now we have added so many names. So I dedicate this to Trayvon Martin, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd, and all the people of color who have been brutally murdered. God of the Great Blue Window. What tide washed me out of the sea, swept me to another shore, God of the Great Blue Window that looks like the ocean, hanging high on the old red brick wall of the church. Oh, say, can you see whose shore, whose sea is this? For they do not know me here. Outside of the water culture where fish flourish and grow. Whose fish, I ask, whose culture? How fast, how slow shall I swim, and in whose ocean? Will you see through my skin, my covered head? I who swam my blue path home while the night sky spun in the blue, blue rain. Fish out of water, fish in a storm in the big blue window. Whose fish, whose water, whose storm, I ask? Whose world filled with the sound of distant waters in the flood of no mercy tides? Whose child lifted on whose shoulder? Whose child, whose mother left behind? Fish live on land. Whose fish, I ask? Whose land, I ask? Whose boat, whose watch? Whose feast, whose hunger? Which fisherman lifting his silver net in the night? Which angel counting the blue, blue shadows, singing, yes, you, yes, you, yes, you, yes, you. My name itself a prayer, yes. My name itself a wish. My name itself the crashing surf. My name itself turning on itself. On land, I breathe uneasy. Blue window churning with a million blind eyes. The wave roaring, but everything silent on the inside. How quickly I swam through the bluest eye, clean as a fish. My fins beating slow, then fast, fast, fast? Or was it fast and then slow, slow, slow? Thank you. Thanks for this opportunity.
Once again, those were just some beautiful, poignant, and just utterly moving poems.
Thank you.
One thing that I just really wanted to point out, I actually wanted to thank you for using poetry to talk about the issue of sexual assault. I think it's a conversation that really needs to be had, and I'm so happy that we can use our platform to discuss this, especially in your poem "What Burns," which you dedicate to the shocking case of Jyoti Singh. I personally was very young when I learned about that case, but it has left such a mark on the way that I view sexual assault, and I don't think any of us will ever be able to forget that case.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I had a quick question about that poem, where you talk about this statistic of only 20% of girls being good. And I was wondering why you picked that number.
I picked that, and if you've seen the text of my poem, it's in quotation marks. So what happened was, when I was doing some research on this online, and there were various articles in the newspapers. In fact, this poem was actually much longer, and then I had many more quotations from newspapers. So that is an actual real life quotation from a newspaper, where the lawyers and the perpetrators were walking around saying, oh, only 20% of girls are good. So basically, everybody else are, trash. So that's the part that haunted me. And, and that is how so deeply ingrained in the consciousness of our men in so many ways, may not be that extreme, but that sense that there is this, that women, girls have a certain place. And therefore, in some way, it is like that knee on the neck that the patriarchy cannot give up, and they will not lift up the woman to stand. So that sort of entitlement that I can do this, I can harm, I can rape. And that was the attitude of the perpetrators who were quoted in those newspapers. So that line stayed in the poem, because it's so concrete when you say, you can just actually have a statistic to say 20% of women, girls are good, and the rest, need to be tamed, or, so that's where that line comes from. But of course, the rest of it is questioning God,
Milka, I'm going to have to cut you off. I'm so sorry.
No, that's fine. Thank you so much. Thanks for giving us this wonderful opportunity. Thank you both.
No, this is a very important topic, and I'm sure it could be discussed at length.
Sure.
Maybe we could do one forum that's just about this, but we will have to move on. Kanchan, can you take over?
Sure. So our next contributor is Miss Monica Farrell, the author of 3 books of fiction and poetry, most recently the collection You Darling Thing. Her work has earned acclaim from a number of publications in the literary community. Her first collection, Beasts for the Chase, was a finalist for the Asian American Writers Workshop Prize in Poetry, and she was also the recipient of the, apologies if I mispronounced this, but Sarah Bande Books' Catherine A. Morton Prize. She has taught both fiction and poetry for the MFA programs at Columbia University and Bennington College, and is currently the Associate Professor of Creative Writing at Purchase College at the State University of New York. Thank you for joining us, Monica. I believe you are muted.
So much. Yeah, thanks to Shruti and Kanchan both from India Currents for having this evening, and to Pramila and Usha from Matwaala for all of the tremendous work you've been doing. I know it's a great deal of labor to create these events, and I've been so astounded by the poems that I've heard this evening. So thank you so much for writing them. Jizilka and Sophia as well. So I'm going to read 4 poems, and it strikes me that My work tends to be a little bit slant, I suppose I should say, that, you know, it addresses, the poems I've chosen all address topics of sexism and chauvinism, but often refracted through some other lens or through some referent. So this first one is called Pony, and I had the idea for it when I was reading a book of poems by a medieval German poet, and there was a line about a pony getting bitten by a snake, and it was sort of, I imagined what the situation must have been like from the pony's perspective, but it's about gender dynamics, not really about ponies and snakes, I suppose I should say. So Pony. After the snake bite, I tried to make noises with the clouds in my throat, the dissolving snow of my tongue. But the young ones kept crying and calling and couldn't hear me. How could I have explained anyway my surprise? Not the kiss of the branding iron, not the crop's electric shock, the bit's silver, felt ever as sweet to me as his firm teeth. Decline is a river you fall into, your hind legs unsteady on the slippery bank. Your last sight, a spray of delicious gilly flowers, bright enough to be suns. There's so much you realize you'll never miss. Mornings in the sludgy mist, the saddle hours, the way children comb and braid your mane, then look at you as though for repayment. In the ring, on the bridle path, how enormous I was, floating above them as they rode me, while I practiced the art of surrender, holding my thoughts separate as a kite. I might as well have been on my own planet of dust, forever careering through shadow fields, till I saw those eyes sparking green from the dark, till I let him shake my body with one touch. Thanks. The next one is a little bit like the 25 responses that we just heard, in that it's sort of a mosaic of different lines that in this case were said by the same person. I was dating this guy for 9 months, and at the end of it, I rearranged some of the actual statements that were made during the relationship into my own form. So the title's not from him, it's actually from Anna Karenina, and it's called Oh You Absolute Darling. It's a little bit filthy, I should say. So, you are sexier than anyone I've ever met. You feel better to touch than anyone I've ever met. You're like a Vargas girl. You're not exactly a barrel of laughs, so much as a barrel of erections. Dear gypsy-themed Barbie doll, those jeans will do you no good. If I were a mosquito, I'd suck all the blood out from you in 5 minutes. If we were stranded together on a desert island, I don't think you'd last long. I'd like to come over there and squeeze the living daylights out of you. I'd like to spin you like a top and fuck you 10 different ways. Such tender meat, raw, dropping from the bone. You're sex on a stick. You're a sex bomb. You're the sex symbol of our set. And this is why you have the male friends you think you do, why women hate you. The last 12 years, you have no idea how many millions of haploid gametes I've spilled in your honor. How I've resented you for walking around as though you were a normal person. I'm sorry to break it to you. Let me explain how this works. When X said he threw away your press photo, what he meant was it's tacked up in his bathroom right now for inspiration. I think you think my attraction to you is funny. Believe me, scared is how you should be. You're a basket of sexual fruits. What kind of fruit are you? I'd like to eat you up with my penis, but I don't know how to do that. You smell like peach. You smell like mango. The way you smell drives me crazy. The divots in your back drive me wild. I love the scoop above your ass, your slender throat, your little pretty limbs and princess face. Your gorgeous rippling muscles covered all over by this smooth, this tawny upholstery. Little doll, delicate flower, the way your ribs stick out, it's like a second rack. And this, I love this. What do people call it? You should always be naked. You should always hold your wine glass like so. You have what no one else has, breasts that demand to be taken notice of, and the tiniest waist I've ever seen. If your waist were any smaller, you wouldn't exist. So I'll just read two more poems. The next one is called Harem Song. And the idea behind it is I was imagining the harem in the Blue Palace in Istanbul. If they all got together and spoke with a voice of a we, and they're welcoming a new person into the harem. Blue crocuses cincture the snake's hole. Monkeys in the palms gibber wild. By midnight, we'll be drunk or high when he arrives with the smile of a man who's just gotten away with murder. White peacocks shake their tails and strut. Say Effendi, say pearl of the pure of heart if he chooses you, or just open your mouth as though in surprise. White peacocks panic in the tall ferns, the reeds. If he can't get it up, he'll fall asleep in your lap as though it were history. Listen, that's the oud player tuning up. I don't want to tell you how to do this, but you might think about a little coal, a few jewels. You might take a look at whatever's happening with your bust. The oud player coughs when our Lord can't get it up. Ivy in the pool comes apart. Somewhere a mutiny is tearing loose from its tree like ripe fruit. But as for now, little boarder, orphan, we're here in this pavilion briefly, this galley deep and portholed place called earth. And you must row your bit, sister. See how lovely you are in the mirror. You must consider, it was the will, your beauty. It was the shiny machine made a Garden of Eden in your veins and paradise of your soft sigh. I think that I'm out of time, or yeah, is that right?
You have 1 minute and 30 seconds.
I'll do a short one for the last one then. It's called Days of Oakland. I lived in Oakland for a little while, and I was thinking back on that time. Yeah, I'm not going to waste any more explanation. Days of Oakland. Now and then you heard the copters flying in search of inmates who'd escaped. Mostly though, it was quiet. At night, outside, the cats would fight and fuck and knock shit down. The couple next door would simmer in heat or bitterness. Sometimes you saw them in the window glass, appearing like quarter moons through mist. There was a drip, of course. Drip, 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 endless in the bathtub's white expanse as Napoleon's soldiers entering Russia. A whiteness like that is staggering. A woman alone is a cave of violets. A man alone, a squirming rat who squeaks. At night, the cats would fight and fuck. At night, inmates ran into fields of liberty and so were saved, while obsessively, out of destitute hope, copters' dilated eyes went on roving. It was like trying to push a mountain up a river or drag a body behind you with one hand. A woman alone is fire on a mountain, light in darkness, night flowers opening unobserved, releasing their scent into everywhere. A woman alone is a shuttered garden, heaped on the edge of a cliff. The identity of the bridegroom is slowly revealed. There is no turning back from that face. Thank you.
Thank you, Monica. I think one thing that I can definitely say for your work is that it forces us to kind of confront the reality of the prejudice the world that we live in. And you 100% don't pull any punches, and I don't think you ever should. One question that I had about your poem, Harem Song, is you kind of discussed the context of the poem being like a woman being invited into the harem. And I was wondering more specifically, why did you want it to be a song?
That's interesting. Really interesting question. I think I had in the back of my mind this idea that, you know, that the women there had developed a kind of like mutinous sisterhood where like someday they would be able to sort of overthrow the system. And not now, you know, like we have to bide our time right now. We have to sort of, in order to survive, do what we're forced to do. And I guess the song is like you know, is a way of uniting many voices together into one thing that you're saying and turn it into something beautiful. So yeah, I mean, I played with the idea of I think I have in mind almost like punk music a little bit in the background, that like this is what they would sing to each other, with each other as one, if they had a chance to do it. It's probably the only poem I've ever written that where the point of view is a plural we, as opposed to like an I or a you or a she or something like that. So that's probably why, but I never thought of it. Thanks for that.
Thank you. I believe you have a question in the chat from Dustin.
Oh, okay.
How do men respond to your confrontation?
Fine.
I think we're gonna wait on that question until the end. Kanchan, if you have another question for Monica, then you can ask. Otherwise, we can move on to the next speaker.
I think you definitely answered my question about why you chose the more song format for your final poem. That's all from me, but thank you so much for your poetry. Hearing. And so to close off our session is a woman who needs no introduction, but I will give her one anyway. Usha Akela is a founder of Matwaala and a prolific writer with 3 books of poetry, 1 chapbook, and 1 musical drama to her name. In 2015, she was selected as a cultural ambassador for the city of Austin and has won a number of accolades for her work, including the Nazim Hikmet Award, the Open Road Review Prize, and the Egan Memorial Prize. So beyond her commitment to Matwaala, Usha is the founder of the Poetry Caravan in New York and Austin, which takes poetry readings to the disadvantaged in women's shelters, senior homes, and hospitals. Thank you for joining us, Usha.
Hi, thank you, India Currents, especially Kanchan and Srishti. You've worked so hard to bring some visibility to our mission. Poetry is especially relevant in times that we're going through. It's a tool for meaning making, healing, and it serves as witness literature. Right at the outset, I want to express Matwaala's I'm looking for the right solidarity with what's happening in the country now. We're going through very turbulent times, and we share more with the African American community, I think, than we realize. We have the same issues of representation, race, color, probably not to the extent that that community has suffered, but I think we are on the same side of the fence. Historically, I agree with Sophia that race issues, political movements, feminism, and poetry have always intersected, and literature have always intersected. They are kind of co-joined segments that are not separate. If you touch one, you touch the other. What I'd like to, the last thing I'd like to add before I start reading is, you know, we try to work in the realm we work in, and the resolve I've made is for me to truly understand what it is to be a South Asian, an NRI, an Indo-American. I think I'm required to read more of African American literature and poetry. And that's something I've resolved to do, that I do need to understand this narrative that's been happening over just centuries. So that's a personal resolve I've made, and I intend to read more of the essays, the poetry that's come from this tremendous struggle that's going on in that community. And as a salute and as a way of acknowledging the struggle that they're going through, I'd like to begin actually with a poem by Amiri Baraka, not with a poem by myself. And it's kind of spine-tingling in what it relates to. It's called Incident. He came back and shot. He shot him. When he came back, he shot and he fell, stumbling past the shadow wood, down, shot, dying, dead to full halt. At the bottom, bleeding, shot, dead. He died then. There, after the fall, the speeding bullet tore his face, and blood sprayed fine over the killer and the gray light. Pictures of the dead man are everywhere, and his spirit sucks up the light, but he died in darkness darker than his soul, and everything tumbled blindly with him, dying down the stairs. We have no word on the killer, except he came back from somewhere to do what he did, and shot only once into his victim's stare, and left him quickly when the blood ran out. We know the killer was skillful, quick and silent, and that the victim probably knew him. Other than that, aside from the caked sourness of the dead man's expression and the cool surprise in the fixture of his hands and fingers, we know nothing. So that poem's by Amiri Baraka. The next poem I'm going to read, like Zilka, this poem's dedicated to Jyoti Singh again, the Delhi rape victim. And it starts with an epigraph by her father. We want the world to know her real name. My daughter didn't do anything wrong. She died while protecting herself. I'm proud of her. Revealing her name will give courage to other women who have survived these attacks. They will find strength from my daughter. And he's referring to a certain law in India where a rape victim's name is not allowed to be used in the press. So it took some time for that name to come out. She was returning home from watching Life of Pi. The hero lived to tell the tale in a boat shared with animals. Was this a sign from fate, her journey in a bus with predators? 6 men falling upon her like hyenas, a wheel jack handle and metal rod plunged in her private parts, the intestines ripped out in a moving bus circumambulating Muniraka, bite marks across her body, death in a Singapore hospital. Her mother's eyes were dark charcoal, unspilled lakes. She died, but we die every day. Kudrat bhi ne hamara saath nahi diya. When the dots finally connected, they were black. Black gags, gnashes across their mouths, black dressed. The women gathered in India Gate, Raizina Hill. The drum beat of marching footsteps in cities spelt justice. Women as petroleum, she the wick keeping the flame burning. If this day is a fruit, it is a papaya with a black heart, in the gaudy gold of a nation. If a flower, the frangipani, its milky sap blistering a nation's veins. If a fish warm as her intestines like eels on the bus floor. If a tree, the tamarind souring the breath of India. And if a name, Jyoti, emerging from a lion, emerging like a lion from a cave, whisking the world like a tornado, enough. And The next one, I'm going to read this poem. It's called From a Brahmin Niyogi Woman to a White Woman. So the Brahmin Niyogi community is the community I come from in South India. I didn't dye my hair blue. I didn't say fuck you. I didn't become bisexual, bipolar, alcoholic, or metrosexual. I didn't try heroin, weed, or morphine. And yet I came apart here and there, one sitting on the ground, one on a chair. I don't have AIDS or irritating things down there. I've stayed monogamous and true. I've been a good girl, I've kept my chastity like a pearl, and yet I rue, I'm sad and rue. You see, I haven't done the things you do. I haven't woken up in strange beds. I've never been led through back alleys where the dirty things and other things carry on. You see, I'm strong and my head's not gone. Sanskrit mantras in my veins. Annamaya kirtanas are inner strains. I didn't fully come apart. Somehow there's enough glue. And yet I rue. I didn't fully come apart. I'm waiting for my cue to live my life like you. I haven't partied in the night. I haven't cursed the light. I haven't taken what's not mine. I know where to draw the line. I haven't the men I know I'm mine. I haven't waited tables. I'm always served. Stable, always stable. I've never fully come apart. Only a part here and there, and even though some parts keenly smart, I've never fully come apart. I watch your men trace your neckline, look into your eyes and dance. I watch your romance and wonder what it's like. His eyes on your lips, desire on your fingertips, your cleavages that you show your ongoing tango. And wonder at you gays and lesbians, and what is it you do, and how, and who, and what is true, and how you drop out of school. And you with husbands 1, 2, and 3, merry and so bloody free, and how you wed and divorce, drifting from the source, or so we think. Who is it that really sinks? I wonder about your lives across the line, different, so damn different from mine. You live it out and about with a scream and a shout, while I'll tell you this, a secret in my fist. I live it all in my skin, incongruous as a purple elephant on a pencil tip. I play charades within with all my parts, and one aches more than the rest, it's my aching heart. I see how you somehow do it as you like, and I am safe I know, guided by theories of reap and sow. I keep myself pure as snow. I live in my suburb home, yellow stucco and stone, and the stones in my pockets grow. I stay within glass walls where duty and goodness call, tipsy on dharma, resisting booze, watching as they crack and break, watching Virginia Woolf inching to the ooze. So, do I have time for one more? Or am I done?
I feel like everyone's enjoying it, so I will say go ahead with one more poem, and then we can do
wrap it up. All right. Okay. Yeah. I'm going to read a fairly much shorter poem. It's called Enough. People, let us say it. Bring back our caged children to a field of sunflowers. Open our land to people as we would our palms to catch a raindrop. Bring back Alan in blue shorts, washed up as a fish, snuggled in sand. Let us not say again he did not make it. Let children not have to tell their stories. Let us bring back Gulsoma, 7 years old, oil her back scarred like a cluster of sardines. Let us hear her laughter before it was married. Let Malala not be shot in the head. Let Carla not have to say 43,200 times raped. And bring back Asifa Bano's rosy cheeks and chirping. Let her bring back goats barefooted and roast warm chestnuts on a humble fire. Let her 8-year-old legs not be parted brutally for things other than what children do. and bring back all the murdered girl infants still as stone swaddled in earth. And the police, mothers, fathers, sisters, and brothers who kill, sell, abuse, rape, shoot their own, let us hang them as decaying fruit from trees. And people, we who know too much, with our tentacles of knowing like octopuses with many eyes, how much of knowing do we need before we say it? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Usha. I think someone in the chat while you were speaking said that your poetry was fearless. And I don't think I could find a better word that just completely encapsulates the writing that you've shared with us today.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I was just blown away by everyone's reading. Very touched and very inspired.
Perfect. I had one question actually about the poem that you once again dedicate to the Nirbhaya case, where your title it discusses the idea of naming.
Right.
And although that poem is specifically dedicated towards Jyoti, I was also thinking about the connections it has to naming during these times of police brutality, where it's so important that we say their names.
Right.
Every terrible case like this happens. And so I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on that importance of naming in poetry.
I think naming is ownership. We must allow victims to own their pain. They should not be forced to camouflage it. And it also deals, I think, with the whole issue of guilt and honor, which is really forced upon women coming from the East, maybe more from the West. You know, the issue of honor, the issue of not having the right to come out with things that are inflicted when you are a victim. You can't even claim the crime in some way. So I think the process of naming is very important to ownership and to also deal with historically what has been ingrained in women, which is this culture of shame. And we must come to a point where a raped woman should not be ashamed to either own to the crime that has been inflicted upon her. And I think naming is a very, very powerful psychological tool in this. I mean, if you think about it, God, the first thing that God gave Adam was the right to name things on the planet. It's a very deeply psychological mechanism. You know, you have a newborn, you name your child, and somewhere there is an understanding that the meaning, the etymological meaning of that word or of the name given to the child will somehow carry through with that soul and that character. So that's the reason I call that poem naming, and it has all the ramifications that you mentioned, of course, which is we have to name the crimes that are happening. We have to name our victims. They cannot go nameless. You know, it's very important. So.
Thank you. I couldn't agree more. As you said, we have to name our victims because otherwise it's as though we're forgetting the crime ever took place. So just to close off this lovely, lovely evening, I just want to give a huge thank you to both Matwaala and India Currents for making this event a reality. During these troubling times, it's so deeply important for all of us to use our platforms as poets to highlight the experiences of minority and disenfranchised communities. So before closing off this evening, I'd like to open up a discussion with all of you about our main theme, which is activism, and more specifically, activism in poetry. And so as a young female writer of color, I'm actually really interested in your thoughts more generally about movements like Black Lives Matter and women's rights, as well as how you feel poetry contributes to these movements. And everyone in the chat who's been adding in questions, well, this is your time to shine. We can address the questions that we have there as well. So
we could start. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Okay. So I think just one question that I wanted to open up to all of you was, when you're writing about a topic like, for example, the Black Lives Matter movement, I was wondering, does the process change in any way? Like, are you more hesitant with your words or about like how they might be construed when you're writing poetry like this?
Can you repeat the question, Kanchan? I'm sorry.
Sure, sorry. I was just wondering, when you write poetry about themes like, for example, the Black Lives Matter movement, does the process that goes into writing that kind of poem, does it change in any way? Like, are you more hesitant with your words in any way?
I think it's the opposite. I think the situation is so emotionally potent that it becomes a fuel of a certain kind. And I think there's a certain receptivity also to the current in the air. I think it's a completely opposite process. You know, it actually uncorks things within.
I think we should ask Dustin Pickering's question to Monica, which is that, how do you respond to your confrontation with male gaze and chauvinism, especially among the literati?
Yeah, I wish my answer would be more interesting, but you know, it's honestly, it's been fine. I would say that in my first book, I was much more sort of genteel and polite and pulled those punches that Kanchan was talking about. And then I made a decision with this second book of poems that, you know, not to self-censor, and that I tend to use a lot of like rarefied vocabulary, really sort of like pretentious words a lot of times, and that's been like brought to my attention. And I decided that it was okay to use the full range of my vocabulary, as long as I also included vulgarity. So I made a conscious choice actually to use things at the sort of lower end, because that gave an accurate picture of like what's in my mind, what my experience of reality is. So yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot of more in your face elements of this book and in this poems, and I'm trying to take a more naturalistic snapshot of things instead of like editing things out to create like a more palatable picture. So I recognize that it's probably feels impolite, as I did in the beginning of the reading. Like there's that moment when I realized, oh no, this is going to be filthy, and I'm really glad that there are no like 7-year-olds in the audience or anything. But you know, but it feels important to bear witness, I suppose, and not to smooth things out. And you know, and yeah, the reaction has been really fine, I have to say. Occasionally someone will come up to me after a reading and say something off color, but I don't mind putting myself out there. That's the, you know, I would say that that's part of my activism.
That's a great response. I think actually Dustin has another question, so I'm going to unmute you, Dustin, so you can ask the question out loud.
Hi, thank you. Yes, I'll just read from my typing. How do we respond to criticism on the right that Black Lives Matter is trained Marxism and Marxism is a failed ideology? Is there a tactful response that would persuade them?
I think this is open to any of the poets.
Yeah. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question clearly.
Basically,
I'm in the chat.
Am I still on?
Yes,
Yeah.
you're on.
Okay, yeah, I was asking how do we respond to criticism from the conservatives who say Black Lives Matter is trained Marxism and that that's a failed ideology? Is there a tactful response that will persuade them?
I feel like this question might be slightly unrelated, but I think they're using their poetry as a medium, if that's helpful for any of the poets to begin talking about it.
Right.
I mean, for example, if you heard this reading, it goes to the very, center of our both emotional as well as historical, social. It addresses all of that. So, I think more than any, discursive prose, I think poetry is able to get to, it's able to touch people's hearts. So even if someone is conservative or, maybe has some other ideology, I mean, when they listen to a poem, there might be a shift in one's consciousness. I mean, that is the power that music and poetry have.
All right, we have another question from Jyoti. I'm going to unmute you. Jyoti, you're on.
Usha, lovely reading. Thank you so much. And thank you also for creating the platform for poetry from Southeast Asia region to be heard, because your line about Sanskrit chants in my veins made me think of how a 5,000-year-old nation with a lot of divisions, inequality, and the problems in a 500-year-old nation, maybe that dialogue is necessary. And I also loved your comment about nothing is more urgent and important than sitting down to listen to poems and talk to each other about this. So the timing of such groups is really important. So the question was about the poem about never falling apart, and say more about the context in which you wrote that and the origin of that, and also say more about how we might everywhere have pop-up groups where poems might be read and exchanged.
Okay, thank you very much, Jyoti. I think it's a deeply ironical poem. I believe, I don't know if there will ever be a utopian world, but I think if women get together, anything can be solved. And I think anything can be unsolved also, because there are, I don't even know where to begin to address the poem. So let me put it this way. I'm an immigrant. I've lived in this country for about 25 years, and very conscious always of the other, which one is trying to become, which one will never fully become, and which one is also, right? There is always this dialectical process that is going on, and how much you want to become the other and how much you cannot become the other. I mean, these are the questions I think we deal with on a daily basis. How much of the inherent framework can we really leave behind? How much can we leave behind? And so there were multiple things happening in that. And somewhere I think there is the utter conviction that at the base, we're all the same. I think I have that very deep spiritual belief, which I think again comes from the East, that all is one, everyone is one. And if you peel the layers away, there really is no other. So I think, dealing with a number of dialectical processes within, from philosophical to emotional. And of course, the irony is that the woman from the East, who is the self, is also inching to the ooze. And that's where I play around. And if you notice, I picked a very, very simple rhyme scheme, almost Dr. Seuss-like. And that was very deliberate, because I think what I was dealing with was very chilling. The deep-rooted patriarchy that makes women come apart, which women all over, whatever the culture, is what we deal with. So at the end, I think I reconcile that other as the self. So that's what was happening in that poem.
Okay, I think we're coming near the end of this session. I'd like to give each poet a minute to speak or give concluding thoughts. If you have anything you'd like for us to take away from reading, we can go over people that spoke. So Pramila, would you like to start?
It has been very moving for me to hear all the poems today. And this session really shows how we can write about activism and read our activist poems. Poetry does not have to be totally disaffected from what's happening around us. And that's what has been demonstrated today in all the poets. Thank you all for coming.
Monica?
Sorry. I was just thinking that was meditating on that word activism and thinking that it differs from war in many respects, but particularly that activism demands empathy. And empathy is something that's, when the poet is writing, hopefully she is stepping outside of her own sensibility and accessing some sort of other perspective and some other vision and putting things together in a new and different way that breaks down boundaries. And similarly, that when one is the reader, when one is the listener to a poem, you're able to step out of yourself into a different sensibility. And this actually, scientists have done experiments and they found that like reading does develop empathy in children, for example. So if it's true that empathy is necessary for activism because it allows us to imagine someone else's plight and someone else's situation and how to bend things towards justice, then it seems essential that we get together and have these conversations in this way, share our work, listen to each other.
Sophia, is she here? Zilka?
Yeah, hi. Thank you all. This has been just wonderful. Thank you, India Currents. And I think what moved me the most today and other times when we meet as Matwaala poets is this amazing range we have. And you know how when we think of a particular kind of poetry, that's not true. Each of us approach things in our own unique ways. And I'm going to kind of jump off what Monica said. Hi, Monica, first time I'm meeting you. So about how we approach activism. And I think when I think of activism or the way I probably use it, it's really using my voice and being able to say what moves me, what angers me, what frustrates me. And by having the courage to embody that and actually act on it by writing about it, to me that becomes an act of activism, of whatever. It's about women or witness to something, the smallest outrage, to be able to have the courage to express it, whether through symbolism or imagery or storytelling. To me, that, and then that allows the reader to enter into the experience. So I think it's sort of a, doubly powerful in that sense. So that's all I want to say. And thank you all so much for this.
Is Sophia here?
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah,
Can you
Sophia.
hear me?
Yeah, we want to hear from you.
Yes.
Your last word.
I think of activism, I think poetry is a wonderful tool for initiating a dialogue. I like to think that my poems can provoke a response. And I think that is, the power of poetry is that it is not normative language. It is language that is not utilitarian. It's not a manual. It's an experiment. Every poem for me anyway, it's a kind of experiment, and it's an interesting because when you write a poem, you write it by yourself in solitude. But when you read it, the dialogue that happens, it instigates the reader is engaged in the making of meaning in a poem. Like everyone relates to it in a different way. And for me, I think this is what I think is the activism of a poem, because its meaning evolves, it leaps from your lips into the heart and the mind of other people. And I think that therein lies its power, therein lies its forward momentum. You then become a kind of catalyst. It has left you, and it has become a kind of like a public property in a way. So that is what I think of as the activism inherent within the act of writing poetry is the engagement it creates with the listening, and how meaning is shifted, and collectively it's a democratic process, this making of meaning.
Thank you, Sophia. Words of wisdom.
Thank you. Thank you so much for everyone for this wonderful event, and I hope we have many more.
Yeah. So I guess in conclusion, my last words are really words of gratitude. Srishti and Kanchan, Vandana, everyone at India Currents, your support of Matwaala has just been amazing. You carried that wonderful article about the poetry wall. So I want to give a call out actually to Sarmita, who was instrumental in bringing that exhibit to the Irving Museum in Dallas. And she's here on the chat. So thank you again, Think India Foundation and the Irving Museum. Srishti, this is, I think sometimes poetry is viewed, it's the minority of arts in a way. And it often finds its expression maybe in college auditoriums or university auditoriums, and to have a mainstream magazine, a South Asian magazine like India Currents to come forward and to kind of integrate us into community as a valid art that can be accessible to the South Asian poetry. I think this is a very important step. I hope you're able to do it again and we bring more poets to the community. Feeling very grateful, feel very much in awe of the women poets here, which is why we involve you so much in Matwaala. It comes out of deep respect for your work. Zilka, Monica, Sophia, Pramila, you know how I feel about your work. Thank you so much for being here. I never get tired of listening to your work or reading it, and I'm deeply grateful. Thanks for being part of Matwaala.
Kanchan, do you have any closing remarks?
I think what I wanted to say has definitely been reiterated by everyone here. But just to close off this lovely evening of poetry, I just want to thank everyone from Matwaala. I'm just so in awe of the poetry that you've brought to the table. You're all just such an inspiration for me as an aspiring poet myself. So yes, thank you for everyone who attended.
Thank you.
Oh, okay. This concludes our first ever Desi poetry reading with India Currents and Matwaala. I want to thank the powerful and poignant poetry by our strong female poets, Silka, Sophia, Monica, Usha, and Pramila. It was cathartic for me to hear my thoughts and emotions expressed so articulately. And I find poetry humanizes the experiences we all face in this time of turmoil. I'm encouraged by revolutionary poetry that I'm hearing, and I'm sure we all feel more united and ready to confront the challenges of our Black and Brown brothers and sisters. So thank you all again for attending, and please consider donating to India Currents and Matwaala. I hope to see you all again, and I will stay connected with you if you send me your email. Thank you, everybody. Have a good day.
How do you?